Hi again, everyone. I'm Patrick Fingston from the Illinoize.com. Wanted to continue our conversations with candidates for Congress from around the state. We're focusing on the 6th congressional district and the Republicans in that race. We're starting with Rob Cruz, a Republican from Oak Lawn, who's running in that race. Rob, thanks for the time. I want to start with some maybe controversy that folks would know you of or from. Being removed from your local school board involving COVID lawsuits and things like that. Why would you make such a play as you did that would lead your fellow school board members to say, we don't want you here?
Yeah, sure. There was a lot of misconception on what we were trying to accomplish. The main focus was trying to follow the rules and protocols that go along with COVID mitigations. During the summertime, Governor Pritzker had allowed all the school boards to make their own decisions. There was a bill, 2789, that was proposed to have the health department open up all of school as we were kind of getting right back into full in-person learning. After 89% or so, I can't quite remember what the exact number was, said that they were going to go, mask optional and see how the first month goes. Governor Pritzker comes out on TV and says that he's going to implement his own mask mandate, even though the legislature didn't give him the authority to do so. So from a civics perspective, the governor was enacting and creating his own law and not executing according to what the legislature had said. The legislature actually didn't say anything. To be perfectly honest, the General Assembly really kept their mouth closed until the Tom DeVore case came up, and then they stepped in. So my position was that the executor did not have the right to take away local control from people who had been elected officials at the school board level. My own school board even said that we were going to go mask optional. So with that being said, that was the reason why I did it. Everyone thought I did it because it was about masks or mandates. It was about controlling things from a local level and not having the legislature's approval to do what the governor did.
So I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago in Shaw Papers about the kind of candidates Republicans need to nominate in a race like yours, which was drawn for a Democrat, is marginally Democrat leaning, but in what could be a Republican year, Republicans have a shot. But that the GOP needs to nominate people who are telling the truth, whether it's about the 2020 election, whether it's about the science behind COVID and the fact that it was real, or the insurrection, or whatever you want to, there are so many issues that it feels like the GOP sometimes has gone off the reservation of fact and science and just common sense. So where do you fall? Obviously there's this mask and COVID controversy that you just explained, but what kind of Republican do you consider yourself as people get to know you and make their decision?
I consider myself someone who's maybe right of center, in the middle there. I do believe in common sense. There were people out there, and don't, mistake it. There are people out there, we had friends, parents pass away from COVID. We're not sitting here saying it wasn't a big deal but I think what we did is we tried to do in Illinois, we try to do a one size fits all the time. And it's not really like that. Some people up in their, older age groups were affected by COVID more. I'm a cancer survivor. People who had, those types of complications were also being affected by COVID. But at the same time, we're putting healthy people in quarantine that are now, exhibiting these mental health concerns, which is another thing I brought up on the school board. We had 242 kids, show up to a counselor's office telling them they're having extreme mental health issues, suicide, things of that nature. That wasn't common in 2019. Even with growing up as a kid, there are always going to be kids who are a little bit feeling down and having the blues. So for me, I think I'm a person who's trying to bring everything back to the middle center. I think we need to have some more common sense stuff. I think we need to follow procedure and protocol, especially during times of an emergency. We can't have governors, whether it's Florida or Illinois, California, or New York, dictating without the legislature's approval. So that's the basis of democracy. So I view myself also as a person who is of Latino descent. I'm a Hispanic American. And right now, I think there's going to be a wave of Hispanics that are looking to maybe vote Republican this time because of the values that we're kind of portraying and how far the left has left us, especially in this state.
And as we record this, Mexican-born Republican just won a special election in Texas in an 84% Hispanic district that was D+5. So what makes you think that there is movement to the Republicans for Latinos?
Well, I can only speak from my own experiences. I was invited to several different church group outings, thousands of people going to church in the evangelical Baptist communities, and sat there and spoke with them. And it all came down to children and kids. There's a lot of concern about curriculum, a lot of concern about testing, sex education standards, and crime and safety. The Latino community, like every other community, I believe, wants to put their kids' futures ahead of their own, which is why we do these 9-to-5s, right? Which is why we talk to and do jobs we don't want to do. And the most consensus was we can't believe how far left the Democrats have gone when it comes to our kids in schools and about safety. And a lot of the Latino community was ready to make that move. They just wanted to see someone, that looks like them, kind of standing out in front saying, I'm running for office. We need to start thinking this way. And I'm not saying we go far right. We just need to bring this thing back to the middle. We need this thing to come back to the middle where we put real standardized testings in place for schools. We take out the sex education standard. This whole gender thing, that's a private matter between people at their own dinner table. And we start implementing trade schools back into our school system where you're learning how to do plumbing, electrical, HVAC. Today's a great example. How many people are calling their HVAC contractor because it's 95 degrees and their system went out, and there's not enough people. So I think you're going to see a move in that direction, especially after what we saw last night here in Illinois as well.
All right. I wanted to talk some issues with you in our remaining time. And I feel like I've got to start these conversations with guns. There's just been such a national conversation after the latest mass shooting at a school in Texas. And I'm asking Republican candidates here not to just give me the easy right talking point of I support the Second Amendment and I don't want anybody to touch guns at any point at any time because that's throwing red meat out. Talk to me about where you'll compromise. What can you support to help keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them? And I'm talking about red flag laws. I'm talking about expanded background checks, whether it's universal background checks, even though the Texas shooter theoretically passed a federal background check, age restrictions, ammunition restrictions. Do people need 5.56? Where are you willing to have a conversation about making change in terms of keeping guns out of the hands of people that should not have them?
Sure. Well, let's start with one thing that you just mentioned. You said the young kid in Uvalde passed the background check, right? So obviously we don't want people having mental health issues having these types of weapons. For starters, it's going to be very difficult to do that. I think part of the problem or part of the solution, let me rephrase, is not just legislative, it's activism, which is something I came from. It's telling parents, hey, are you keeping an eye on your child? Or a friend, hey, how's your one buddy doing, or whatnot, to kind of regulate that, because obviously we have to have our Second Amendment, and I'm not throwing red meat out there because it's designed to stop government from overtaking the regular citizens' lives as it has in the past. Where I'm willing to compromise, and this is the honest to God truth, is that I'm not sure anymore if an 18-year-old kid should be buying a firearm without their parental consent. And I'll also couple that with, for example, you can't have a gun at school whether you have the right to carry a gun, like a concealed carry in Illinois. You cannot have a concealed carry weapon if you're 18 years old. You have to be 21 years old to have that weapon and conceal carry with it. So you can't have it at school, and you can't have it because you're too young. So the only reason why you would have it is for hunt and to protect your home. I'm okay with that. I think parents need to sign off on it. Their kids are having weapons in their houses and be a little bit accountable for if something like this were to happen. I also couple it the same thing with abortion. I think we need to couple these two issues side by side. Parental involvement, parental consent for abortion and gun purchases need to be the standard, not just in Illinois, but around the country, because parents now are just abandoning their posts and government's trying to fill in. And that's where you get all these legislative misnomers, in my opinion.
And you bring up abortion, which, leads me right into what situation we could have in the next few weeks with the potential Supreme Court ruling that may be out there or overturning Roe v. Wade. Obviously, the parental notification law is a state issue and wouldn't be a congressional topic. But if Congress is making moves, the House has passed a bill codifying Roe. There's talk about the Hyde Amendment, et cetera. Where do you see the role of Congress if Roe is overturned?
I think personally that this issue needs to go back to the states. We've had it at the federal level for a while. If I can reiterate any theme that I could get past, to you, Patrick, and anyone else, is that America, real life, the real world is not a one size fits all. Me and you wear different size shirts. I'm pretty sure about it. So we all go different.
You don't want to wear shirts this big. I'm totally.
But my point is that the more local control, the more your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues are making decisions based on for these types of issues, I believe it's the better. It's to have an easier conversation with your neighbor to discuss how should we handle this, how should we handle that at the state and local level. So I think Congress needs to step out of the way, and not everything is legislative. Sometimes things are activists or advocates. Sometimes things are legal, and we have to let those things play out. To me, it's kind of disappointing as everyone's trying to make this a campaign issue when everyone knows that if the court decides to rule in that direction, there's nothing we can do. So I believe that an abortion needs to go down to the state level, and then each state will pick its representatives on what it believes is the right thing.
Also wanted to talk about the economy and inflation and gas prices. I think are such the top of everyone's mind because they're impacting so many people. Here in my corner of the suburbs, gas is over $6 a gallon for regular unleaded now, and higher than that inside Chicago city limits. I assume it's not that far apart from where you are in your suburb. In Congress, what would be immediate action? I know that the Republican talking point is let's unleash the oil and gas industry, and that makes sense in the midterm, but people are hurting now. So if you show up in January of 2023 and you see $5, $6, $7 a gallon gas prices, what's your immediate fix? Is it a repeal, a short-term repeal of the federal gas tax? Is it something additional? Is it strategic petroleum reserve? How do you approach gasoline, gas prices, federal gas taxes on day one?
These are very complicated problems. So I like to keep things as simple as possible because I'm just a construction guy out here trying to make my way in the world. So if you're buying something from someone else, you are at their mercy on what price you end up paying. If you make something yourself, you are at the mercy only of whatever effort you have to put in. And when we stopped making the amount of oil that we kind of had prior to COVID, even during COVID, it wasn't, as big of a deal. I do think it's time to get back to that label that says America made or made in America. We have to figure out ways to increase our supply so that supply can start to meet the demand and even surpass it, so that prices will come down, because more competitive the better the price. Less competitive, the worse the price. And and on top of it, we've kind of bought into this where we're, other countries around the world have picked up the market share, and then they utilize those resources in an aggressive manner, like Russia did in Ukraine. So I think it's time for Congress to come down and sit together and say, hey, what are some inactive policies that we can do to encourage the production of oil here on the state side? Because in addition to that, we are probably the cleanest producers of fossil fuels around the world. But now we're shutting it off and allowing China and Russia to pollute the entire globe and have no recourse other than throwing a fit on TV. So that's not going to do it. So I think Congress needs to come together, figure out a way to encourage, either through policy or unity, that we have to get back to being an independent country and not just oil. A lot of our products are made other places, and people can start holding us hostage if they decide they wanted to.
You mentioned Latinos turning toward the Republican Party when earlier on in our conversation, and before I let you go, I wanted to touch on immigration, just along those same lines, and pulling back this up so it's not an opinion on my part that showed that the Donald Trump immigration policy, the build the wall, the keep everybody out sort of direction, turned off a lot of Latino voters. And you can see the numbers bear out in 2016 specifically. There are millions of undocumented, illegal, whichever word you like to use, here, whether we want to admit it or not. We can't shove them all in the back of a pickup truck and move them back across the border. How do we handle those that are here? Even if you just shut down the border, you still have millions that are here. So what's the strategy to handle the existing number of people and then regulate or fix the immigration system, which is so critically broken?
Well, for starters, I think it's resources. I have in-laws that are down in that are from the McAllen, Texas area, and they went down to visit family not too long ago. And there's just not a lot of resources. We live in one of the most advanced countries in the world, and we're still using paper. We don't have the type of I don't want to say defense mechanism resources that we were even sending over to other countries to defend their borders. So I think that's the first thing. Number two, we have to streamline this process. My grandma came here back in the 1920s. She didn't have to wait 5 or 6 years to get her citizenship. I know it was a different time then, but we have to try and couple that a little bit more when it comes to time frame. Thirdly, we have a lot of people here that are undocumented. And I can tell you this, as a Hispanic and walk around Latino communities and family parties, they don't like people that are coming into their neighborhoods that aren't documented, because to them, they don't know who they are. And just because they're Latino, that doesn't mean they're not out to do some harm against their own people. So I think we have to first, we have to clean up this mess. We have to figure out what we are going to do with these people. I think there's a lot of good people here too that are just trying to get away from tyranny. We have to give them opportunities if they're willing to, go through the process. We have people like the DACA group. That to me, that the horse is out of the barn with that. We have to make that, we have to legalize that, citizen those people, and then we have to end that program, because I think going back and forth with this, it's not working. And as we start to get a more streamlined immigration policy, we have to toughen up on those who do try to sneak over, and get a little bit more tougher. We have to increase our resources, our manpower, our abilities to defend our own border down there. Just because we have illegal flow of drugs, human trafficking. I mean, I can go through all the talking points, but that's not, everybody knows that already. So I think, one, we have to clean up our mess. We have to make a decision on what we're going to do. And my decision would be is that if you're here and you're contributing, welcome to America. We need more people to contribute. We have labor shortages going through the roof, 1.2 million job openings in manufacturing and construction all across the country. And CEOs are afraid to bring back their manufacturing because they're afraid young people don't want to do the work. So we have to find the common line there, especially with our immigration policies. and just streamline as best we can.
Rob Cruz, candidate for Congress in the 6th district in the suburbs. Rob, where do they find you online?
Yeah, you can check us out. Our social media handles are at Cruz, CRUZ 4 FORIL, or you can go to Rob Cruz 4 FOR Congress.com.
We turn now to Burr Ridge Mayor Gary Grosso, who's one of the candidates in the 6th congressional district. Mayor, thanks for your time. This is a district that was drawn to elect a Democrat, whoever that Democrat may be. While it looks like it's slightly potentially swingy, what makes you think you're the guy that can win that district in November?
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. I think it's very iffy for a Democrat. I think it's very opportune for a Republican such as myself. First of all, let's start out with some geography. I am the only candidate that has governed and lived in both counties. Burr Ridge sits both in DuPage and Cook County, and all of our retail businesses, restaurants, stores, et cetera, are on the Cook County side. So we deal with a lot of the Cook County issues and also, of course, the DuPage issues. I also lived in Western Springs, part of the district in Cook County for 13 years, where my wife Janet and I raised our 6 children. So I have a lot of experience in both sides of the county. My positions, I think, are very consistent with the working people in both these counties. For example, I kept, but respectfully, I kept Burr Ridge open with the help of my board. And talking to my residents, I sent out over 140 mayor's messages, often 7 days a week for months on the pandemic. And we determined after we knew what we were dealing with, and with due respect to people that just wanted to let everything open in the beginning, we didn't know what we were dealing with. Letting somebody do whatever they wanted to do in the beginning and the spring of 2020, I think was not the most responsible thing to do. What we did was we weighed the problems and we stayed open. We stayed open with a tent program to save our restaurants that was nationally recognized by Fox Business News as a way to handle the pandemic, and was locally featured on many of the shows about how to handle the pandemic. We gave stipends to our small businesses to keep them open, to pay rent and to pay employees. I also was on the Board of Health for over 13 years in DuPage County. And so I was in constant communications with them. And when we realized that this was going to probably affect only about 1% of the population, we started to ease up on the regulations. We didn't want to go sue people and bring attention to Burr Ridge. We just wanted to make sure we had a village that survived. I was also on the 911 board. Crime is a big issue in this election. Crime, inflation, border crisis, things like that. Crime is a very big issue. Again, Burr Ridge sits in both counties. Oftentimes, and we apprehend somebody that does something wrong, carjackings, that kind of things in Burr Ridge. And what happened about 6 months ago, the first thing a perpetrator said to our police officer was, "What county am I in?" That does tremendous disservice to people that are in Cook County. It underlines why we have such a good, strong state's attorney in Bob Berlin in DuPage County, and what the message that law enforcement in Cook County State's Attorney's Office is sending versus the one in DuPage. And so I appreciate that. People in Cook County need to be protected just like anybody else. That's the #1 job of government, is to protect people and property. And I want to be sure, as the congressman, that we do everything we can from the federal side to make sure local law enforcement has what it needs to do the job, and that they are doing the job.
I think that ties into guns, which I think is a fair transition here. Obviously, the crime problem in Cook County and it's not exclusive to Cook County. I mean, downstate communities too, suburban communities are still having issues, but those are primarily handgun crimes, whether they're ghost guns, whether they're illegally possessed guns, et cetera. But the issue that most people, I think, are talking about on a national level, especially the congressional level, are maybe the more Armalite style rifles, the AR-15s, the 5.56 kind of rifles that were part of the perpetrating of the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas recently, and have been a part of too many mass shootings recently. And I've said before, I'm a gun guy, I'm a gun owner. I grew up on a farm. I understand and believe in the right to protection and hunting and all of those things that go along with the Second Amendment. But I also question the need for things like an Armalite rifle, for things like a 5.56 caliber weapon that have been used to perpetrate so many heinous acts, and what those levels of caliber do to a little kid's body. So I'm respectfully asking, don't give me just the straight Republican talking point of I support the Second Amendment, I'm with the NRA, don't take your hands off my guns. Be honest with me. What would you support in terms of federal legislation? What would you be willing to discuss to help keep guns out of the hands of people that should not have them?
Sure, Patrick, thank you. It's a very opportune time to speak about this, not only Uvalde, but Buffalo, and unfortunately, too many names and incidents that we could speak to. As a result of those incidents, I think you're already seeing now the Republican side willing to sit down at the national level and at the federal government to discuss these things. I have said that a discussion has to happen regarding age of someone being able to own an AR-15, go in and buy one on their birth date at the age of 18. We have restrictions. We restrict people with all kinds of licenses and things like that. We can preserve, and I would defend the Second Amendment, as I think anybody that holds a constitutional office should, because it's part of our Constitution, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. The Second Amendment is what the Second Amendment is, and we have a right to protect ourselves. But that right should be discussed in the context, does an 18-year-old need to be able to buy an AR-15? I think, and I'm more than willing to engage in a conversation of why can't we make that age 21? We've regulated ages for drinking and many other things because we decided, and I get that people go to the Army and they can be handed one of these weapons, but then that's to defend us, and that's under command. So let's talk about age for AR-15s. Let's talk about background checks for those types of weapons, maybe a little bit more intense background checks for those types of weapons. Why do you need this? You pointed out how destructive they can be. Part of the NRA, and I think its founding principles are that it was in favor of gun training, and I think that's admirable, gun training. We need to have this kind of gun training. These weapons can do mass destruction in matters of seconds, and therefore we need to have more background checks, understand why. Now, I understand that someone might say, well, the person that was involved in Uvalde, had no known history. I get that, but if you had an age restriction and it was 21 instead of 18, maybe that history would have come out, or certainly the incident wouldn't have happened. So there's been enough violence in the nation that we should discuss this. We are a nation that I think prides itself on trying to build consensus. I have been a consensus builder. That's the way I operate. I go to my board all the time, or anybody I'm on a committee with, and we get opinions. It is so important now to talk about possible age restrictions, more background checks for certain types of weapons, even maybe special licensing and training for these types of weapons, because they can do so much damage so quickly in the wrong hands. So I welcome that discussion. I think that when people start saying universal this and ban that, then people start digging their heels in. So let's get to topics that we can discuss, such as age, such as better background checks for certain types of weapons. And I believe those types of weapons should be in the discussion nowadays, given what's happened in this country. And I'm glad to see Republicans and Democrats at the national level sitting down and talking about this.
And of course, not to diminish any other hot topic, there's abortion out there. It seems to appear that the Supreme Court is going to rule to overturn Roe and kick it back to the states. So there obviously Democrats in Washington want to codify Roe in federal statute, are going to do the things that they can to strengthen Roe as long as they can. Even if it goes back to the states, it appears there will be some sort of federal role. What do you want Congress to do? Is it Hyde Amendment? Is it a preterm or a partial birth, or what's your view of the role of the federal government in abortion, assuming that Roe does get ruled unconstitutional?
Okay, so you are assuming, and I think we all have to assume, but let's start with the premise that, first of all, it's an unpublished, kind of a pirated decision right now. It hasn't come out. We are now deep into June, and the decision is likely to come out anytime. It was 5-4, and that means one vote could change the outcome. But let's get to the substance that I think is your question. I am a lawyer, and you mentioned the Hyde Amendment. My mentor actually argued the Hyde Amendment to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court is, in my opinion, going to make this a states' rights issue, which probably it was and should have been all the time. It looks like, that they're going to say it's going to be 15 weeks is acceptable. So in so-called reversing Roe, what the decision looks like it's going to do is say that the Mississippi law of 15 weeks is reasonable, and they're not going to say it's not. And in fact, I think Florida and Governor DeSantis has already signed a very similar bill. I don't know if it tracks, but I think he signed a 15-week bill. And certainly there are not too many people more conservative on these issues than Governor DeSantis. And so this seems to be an acceptable route. What we can't do is go back to what happened prior to Roe. And so there's going to be some balance. Nobody's going to get everything. Nobody ever gets everything in life. And I think that the right thing to do is not to have a court decide what this is going to be about, but have the states decide it. And I think that's where the Supreme Court is going.
I feel like we have to talk about the economy too, just as that's, we talk about guns, we talk about abortion, and those are often things in hypotheticals for a lot of people's real lives. In the case of gas prices, in the case of going to buy bread at the grocery store, it impacts every single person. And we're both in the suburbs. Gas is $6 a gallon now for regular unleaded and climbing, and it impacts real people, and it's making people question whether they can even commute to work at times. In Congress, what would be, if we're still in this place in January 2023, what's the Congressman Grosso opinion? Is it and I'm talking about immediate relief? I know the general answer is unleash the American energy economy, but in the immediate help people situation, is it a repeal of the federal gas tax for a period of time, even if it's 6 months? Is it a tax credit? What's the way to help people from the federal side immediately?
Right. So thank you for getting to this topic, because that's what this topic, this is what this election's about. I think, as you pointed out, Patrick, that inflation and the economy is affecting everyone. don't forget the middle class usually supports and pays for, you could argue, the upper, the more wealthy people and for the poor and programs, so that it is now the middle class that's really getting squeezed by this inflation issue. And so since it is so dire, since it is so immediate, there has to be a two-pronged plan. You have to do something immediate before you do something, as you're doing something long-term. Long-term, we have to get back to energy independence. We had it. God gave us the oil and gas that's beneath our soils. We have to respect climate change and look at alternatives, but please, let's use what we have and not be dependent on unfriendly governments and pay more than we would have to pay. That's the long term. We have to get back to energy independence. We have to get back to manufacturing and having things done here in America. Short term, we have to look at getting rid of the federal gas tax and maybe even asking the states for a while to lower that to give some immediate relief, because gas is affecting people's ability to go to work and do their jobs. I don't know what some of the other choices are, but what we have to do is find what the short-term relief is going to be. I think you have to look at whether or not there's gouging going on by the oil companies. When the price of a barrel of oil was here and the profit margin was there, how does that now relate when the price of oil by barrel is here, and yet it seems the profit margin is now way up here? At least the price of gas has more than doubled. And in some states, I think in New York and California, they're now trying to calibrate some of the gas pumps to see if they'll go as high as $10 or more. So, are the oil companies gouging? My suspicion might be yes, and I want to be sure they're not. And if they are, then the federal government should use all of its power to make sure that while free enterprise, which I'm for, and people making a profit, which I'm for, is not going to really cripple this economy. I really question, however, also the Fed raising yesterday 3/4 of a point. I'm probably in that group of people and economists that are saying, and I'm not an economist, but people are questioning, is that really the right move? Do you really want to now make it even more expensive for people's mortgages, more expensive for their credit cards, when they're already being pressed with gas and grocery prices that we haven't seen in 40 years? So my first vote when I get to Congress is to get a new Speaker of the House. And the second vote and the second thing that I'm going to be looking for is how to get immediate control of this inflation problem, short term, and have a long-term vision of energy independence in this country.
You mentioned a new speaker, and there you can say a lot about Kevin McCarthy, good or bad.
I don't know if he'd be the guy, but
and who knows if he's even going to get through it at this point. But I argued in my Shaw media column last week that Republicans should not nominate candidates for Congress, for U.S. Senate, even for governor, that are unwilling to accept honest to God truths. Joe Biden won the election. COVID was real and killed people. Masks worked, and whether or not it qualified as a legal insurrection or whatever word you want to use, that what happened on January 6th at the Capitol was wrong, and those people should be prosecuted. It wasn't a happy tour. I think I think if your district is going to elect a Republican, I feel like it probably needs to be somebody that is willing to accept these truths that aren't along this crazy QAnon far right conspiracy theory side of the party. And I'm interested in your opinion on, not necessarily going through each and every one of those points, but where's the common sense, and are you willing to sit back and say, listen, even if it's not in line with Trumpism, even if it's not in line with the hardline red meat, I'm going to stand up and say what's true and what's not? I
think I just have, and I think I always have been. I think if you I've been endorsed by the Chicago Tribune and the Daily Herald and many of the leading Republicans in the state, Jim Durkin. I was endorsed by Dan Webb, who prosecuted Jussie Smollett. Dan Cronin, who is the chairman of DuPage County. So I've worked with a lot of these people. I think they've endorsed me, and the media outlets have endorsed me because I have been true to my values and true to the statements. I was one of the people in this, the only one, I believe, of the 6 candidates here that said January 6th was a riot. It violated sacred government ground. People certainly have a right to peacefully protest, but a point came on January 6th where that became a riot that caused not only severe damage to the capital of the United States. I went to Georgetown University. I was very fortunate to be able to go to Georgetown University, first in my family ever to get a college education, let alone go to law school. And I used to go down there. I played on a baseball team at the Washington Monument. These are special places. What happened on January 6th, that is our capital. It should not have happened. It was a riot. And people died, and people were seriously injured, and so I've recognized that, and but we've gotten through it, and it's important in this country that we now move forward. Recognize we're not perfect, but we are still the best form of government ever conceived by man. People still wake up in the morning on other parts of the world, and they want to still come to this country, which I'm all for, as long as they come legally, and we should be processing applications that are in line already that we've delayed. I think there's like 1.4 million applications of people that want to legitimately get into this country, and we should process those, and we should do things on the southern border better than they're being done now.
Burr Ridge Mayor Gary Grosso. Mayor, thanks for the time. Where can they find you? Where can folks find you online?
GaryGrosso.com.
We move to another of the candidates in the 6th district race, Scott Casper. He's an attorney from Orland Park. Scott, I wanted to get this question answered by most everybody because, I've had strong feelings about Republicans need to nominate the most electable candidates in November. Do you think that's you, and why?
I do believe that that's me. As we look at the general election, we need someone who's going to be able to sort of hit the ground running. We're taking on 2 serious incumbents. Both of them have, their armies and sort of a machine that's ready for the general election, depending on which of them actually goes forward in the general. It's going to be a formidable opponent, and they're going to have, all of their support in DC. And so you need someone who knows what's, I'm not a politician by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm no stranger to politics. I've been working on campaigns the last 20 years. And, as we look at DC in the general election, you need someone who's going to be able to hit the ground running. And you need someone, frankly, who, once we get to DC, is not going to fall in the swamp. You need someone who's going to stay true to their values. Much of what I do as a lawyer is I listen to my clients, I hear their concerns, and I come up with solutions, and then I win. And it's really the same strategy that I've been employing with this campaign, and that I'll employ as being a congressman. I'm going to listen to the concerns of my constituents. I'm going to put together action plans, and we're going to deliver. And it's one thing to say you're going to do something, but I'm a person of results, and that's what I plan to do. In my race, there are 2 mayors. I think that both of them think that they have an advantage because they're mayors, but it's one thing to be an executive of a city, and that's what it is. It's an executive, executive position, right? It's a different thing to be a legislator, where you have to build agreement among a lot of people. And as a lawyer, that's what I'm set up to do.
I want to talk issues for the most part, because in the end, that's what people make their decisions on, and I've been starting with guns just because that's so personal to so many, with the, especially with the shooting at Uvalde, Texas recently. I'm asking candidates like you to not give me the typical Republican talking point of I'm all Second Amendment all the time, don't touch my guns. Talk to me like the father of a 13-year-old who could have that fear that someone walks into her school. What should Congress do? What would you be willing to discuss in terms of keeping guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them? Is it expanded background checks? Is it a stronger red flag law? Is it limits on ammunition like 5.56? What should we be doing? Because right or left, pro-gun, anti-gun, whatever, we all have to look at this and realize that this can't continue to happen.
Yeah, and you've touched on kind of two issues that I think are very important here. One of that is keeping our children safe when they're in school, right? And if you look, there's about 400 million guns in the United States. So we're not going to get rid of the guns, right? We have all the laws on the books. If we want to be serious about it, we can enforce the laws, and we can keep the guns out of the people who shouldn't, the hands of the people who shouldn't have them. Most of gun violence takes place is by repeat felons, people who shouldn't have a gun in the first place. And then you also have a serious situation where you have people who have mental health issues who acquire guns and do horrible things with them. If you look at these school shootings, in every instance, it's the case where it's someone that was known for having mental health issues, someone who if there's a red flags, every red flag was there. So it's a matter of identifying those people before they, which they all were identified, but it's a matter of doing something about it on the mental health side and keeping them away from guns, right? Our schools in Illinois are gun-free zones, and it's shown time and time again that when you have a person who wants to carry out a mass murder, a mass shooting situation, they go to the gun-free zones because there's no return fire there. And we need to look at our schools and figure out how we can fortify them. I'm a fan of putting police officers in schools. In many schools, many inner city schools, for example, have community service officers, they might call them, or but these are trained members of the police department who know how to operate a weapon and know how to handle a crisis situation. I'm in favor of putting those in our schools. There is a cost for that. I think it's a cost worth bearing. In terms of red flag laws, we have a national database that's already in place. It's my understanding that it does not have a mental health component to it. So I'm certainly interested in having that conversation and looking into that. But what Congress has been talking about the last couple of days seems sort of like aspirational at best. I don't think they're and you see this time and time again. Every time there's a mass shooting, you see the politicians all they have these sort of feel good things where they talk about these things, but they never actually do anything. And I think that's what we'll see again at the conclusion of this current session. But no, we have the laws on the books. It's a matter of enforcing them. It's a matter of keeping guns away from repeat offenders. It's a matter of keeping them away from people who have mental health issues. And it's a matter of protecting our schools.
What about, like the age limit idea that I've heard floated on? If you're gonna buy a what do you want to call it, a high caliber, or whatever rule or term they want to use for an Armalite style rifle or a larger caliber rifle. Do you support the idea of 18 to 21 or a parent's permission or something like that?
No, and here's why. Because we don't do that with any other constitutional right that we have. And, I think to look to look at the school shootings that have happened where the shooter was under 21, yeah, that was perhaps a characteristic, but I don't think that that's necessarily the reason. In every single instance, those shooters had mental health issues, and I think that's what we need to work on addressing first.
I wanted to move to abortion quickly. That we're expecting the Supreme Court, if the leaked decision was in essence true, that Roe will be overturned possibly within days. What's the role you see for Congress in that discussion? Is it, obviously Congress now is trying to codify Roe in statute. The Hyde Amendment is still out there. What should Congress do if this gets kicked back to the states?
Well, I don't think that Congress should do anything, quite frankly. I think it actually is a matter best handled by the states. And let's first talk about the fact that we had an opinion that was leaked out of a draft opinion that was leaked out of the Supreme Court. That's the first time this has ever happened in the history of the Supreme Court that we're aware of, certainly. And on an issue like this, it really, I think, is a very troubling reality. The Supreme Court needs to be able to have its ability to circulate draft opinions so that they can reach consensus or formulate their dissents. So I think that is an issue separate from this discussion, but that's something that Supreme Court needs to get to the bottom of. But no, I do think that this is an issue that's best left to the states. And how will that change in Illinois? Actually, it won't. We currently are one of 8 states that has codified Roe v. Wade as a state law. So nothing will change in Illinois as long as we continue to have a Democrat supermajority in Springfield. So I think that this sort of rush to panic is not really well placed here in Illinois, because nothing's going to change in the short term, at least, quite possibly never. But I do think that this is a matter best left for the states, and we're going to see different states have different approaches to this issue.
What about the politics of it, though? I mean, you're in a district that was drawn to elect a Democrat, and while we saw a trend for moderates, specifically moderate suburban women, moving Republican before this draft came out, there's a lot of concern by some Republicans, hope for some Democrats, I would suppose, that this fires up those moderates to vote Democrat instead of Republican. Does this issue help or hurt Republican candidates in the fall?
In some districts, it may be a factor. In the 6th district, I don't see this being an issue that's going to fire up really much of anyone. And it's kind of fun if you look at it. Marie Newman, she toppled Dan Lipinski. Dan Lipinski was one of the last pro-life Democrat members of Congress. And so as a result, Marie Newman believes that this is a very important issue to the voters in the 6th congressional district, or the new 6th, right? And I don't think it ever was an issue. I think she happened to be lucky in toppling Dan Lipinski on she did it at the primary stage. A lot of people actually weren't even aware it happened. And when they went to vote in November of 2020, they were surprised not to see Dan's name on the ballot. So I don't think it's actually the issue that she thinks it is. As I've talked with voters, and I've talked with thousands of voters about this, I think actually the vast majority are actually pro-life to some extent. And the 6th district includes a lot of evangelical people on the west side and a lot of Catholics on the east side. And the one thing that they have in common is this issue that they are pro-life.
I wanted to move to the economy and inflation, and obviously gas prices are a part of that right now. Uh, where you live in Orland Park, kind of the more southern side of that district, it's a 30-mile commute one way into the city. There are a lot of folks that have to do that. And it's putting a real strain on their budgets when we're looking at gasoline at $5.50 and $6 and higher dollars per gallon for regular unleaded. In Congress, what would you support if we're still in this crisis come January? Is it a short term, or an immediate fix? Is it a short term repeal of the federal gas tax? Is it a short term reduction? Is it some other cash infusion? What's your immediate fix to help people who are literally choosing between food and gasoline right now?
Yeah, Patrick, you're exactly right about that last statement. There are people who are having to make very difficult decisions right now because gas is obscenely high. It went up over $1 in the last 10 days, which none of us have witnessed in our lifetime. It's shocking. It went up. I think it went up 40 cents over the last weekend alone. I mean, it's troubling at best, and I think it's something that's self-inflicted. The Biden administration on the first day in office signed executive orders that suspended drilling permits and shut down pipelines. The Keystone XL pipeline being one, which is a pipeline that was coming to Chicago, to our refinery facilities on the southwest Chicago area, and just outside my district actually, and. So the long-term fix has to be to get those pipelines opened and running again, and to get the oil pumping into our economy, because we're not quite at a point where electric cars and the Green New Deal are gonna be something that we can survive on. In Congress, it's a difficult thing because there's not much that Congress actually can do about this situation. This is brought on by President Biden's executive orders, and we could suspend, for example, the federal gas tax. That would provide some relief, certainly. In Illinois, much of the taxes are state and local taxes. There has been talk about Governor Pritzker suspending some of those. Certainly, that would provide short-term relief. But what we need to do is we need to have a longer term solution here. And, Congress can put pressure on the president to get pipelines, running again. You can do it by controlling the power of the purse on other things that the president cares about, to get his attention to open up those pipelines. And then, I'm all about having a long-term solution to our energy needs in this country. There's a lot of, electric cars are cool, but we don't have an electric grid that can support all of us having them, and certainly not all of us can buy a $65,000 vehicle. So we need to figure out a long-term solution that's going to work for middle America.
And roughly, I mean, the federal gas tax is just under 38 cents. The total, I mean, the tax itself, the excise tax, the storage fee, just under 38 cents a gallon. So, I mean, it would be a significant difference if that got dropped, and you're talking $6 to $5.70, but clearly that's not going to change the lives of people dramatically, much like how the Democrats in Springfield are stopping the increase for inflation in July, where they're saving us maybe 2 cents when the clock hits July 1. So before we let you go, Scott, I feel like we need to talk really quickly on immigration. Depending on the number you see, there are literally millions of undocumented, illegal, whatever term you want to use for them in the United States right now. The border situation is clearly still porous. It's still it's not handling people seeking asylum correctly. and whether we like it or not, there are people who are fearing for their lives who are coming to the border. So these are two separate issues, of course, but one, how do we handle the people that are here already? Because we're not just going to be able to load them on flatbeds and move them south across the border. And two, what is the way to actually increase the processing functions on the southern border so that we can get through these people that are coming through and decide, yes, you should be here. Yes, you're in while we decide your asylum claim, or no, you got to go. How do we improve these situations? Because again, whether you agree or not on who's coming in or what's coming in, or you're anti-immigrant or pro-immigrant, it's not working right now.
That's correct. It's not working right now. Our border is I think it's a crisis right now, quite frankly. So immigration is very important to me. You know, my father, he fled Latvia, a communist country. He and his siblings fled. They came here to the United States. And, you know, there was a process they had to go through. They sought refugee status, and it was a process that took about 5 years to play out before they could actually gain entry into the country. After that point, my father became, he became a citizen, and, by all measure, he is the American dream by all measure. Certainly I've enjoyed a great lifestyle because of that sacrifice that he and his family made. So I am a proponent of legal immigration. I think, immigration and many of the great people that we've brought into this country are what makes America strong and unique in this world. But we do have, we have immigration laws. I believe they need to be enforced. We have a southern border that is presenting a lot of challenges right now. I am in favor of finishing the border wall down there. We need to secure our own borders, or else we're not going to have much of a country left. But at the same time, that border wall can and should have many, many gates along the way where we can let people in legally. I am a proponent of the Remain in Mexico policy, where we, as opposed to the catch and release policy that the Biden administration has tried to put back into place, where we actually vet people at the border and we don't let them in until we've at least cleared some preliminary matters. There's a whole situation of people who are in our country. If you think of the so-called dreamers, there's no easy solution here. I would be in favor of coming up with a way of helping the dreamers to become legal citizens, perhaps on an expedited basis. But in any event, we need to enforce our laws, and we need to secure our borders.
Scott Casper, candidate for Congress in the 6th. Scott, how do people find you online?
Well, to learn more about me, you can visit my website, which is at casperforcongress.com. And it's Casper spelled K-A-S-P-A-R for Congress.com.
We move on to Orland Park Mayor Keith Pecaw, who is running for the Republican nomination in the 6th Congressional District. Mayor, thanks for the time. Let me start with the maybe most controversial thing people out there know you for. Most likely would be the lawsuits and the outspokenness you had on COVID mitigations and shutdowns and lockdowns and all of those sort of things at the heart of the pandemic. I have a few friends that live in your fine community, and they expressed frustration to me at the time that you all were using city funds and the city's coffers to push fights over COVID mitigations and fights with the governor that were in many of their views unnecessary. Why push so hard on those issues, and was it the right time when so many people were honestly dying?
So you can go back and look at any video that I did, anything that I did. It was all based on the facts and the data that was out there at the time. And in hindsight, and if you'd have told me 2 years ago that looking back in hindsight 2 years from now that every decision we would have made would have been the correct one, I would have said that's probably not going to be the case. But it has been the case. We were right every single time. And we tried to engage the governor. He refused to engage. So we engaged him how we could engage him, which was publicly. We felt like, well, we know that he did not do enough to protect seniors. He did not, he closed down parks, golf courses, stay-at-home order, all those things were not necessary, weren't warranted by the data. And, we gave him the first few weeks, we didn't know. It was very clear after that was the case. Regarding the one lawsuit that we filed, I think we ended up spending $60,000 on that lawsuit. But if you recall, when that lawsuit was filed, it was to open gyms and open restaurants because our restaurants and gyms were still closed. About 3 or 4 other places also filed similar lawsuits, and he ended up opening them way sooner than what he said he was going to. Ours was not heard in court until after he opened them. So of course they didn't, and it was just a TRO, and they said that they would not, that it was moot basically. So which it was, and then for basically less than $1,000, we kept the lawsuit going for 3 or 4 more months because Cook County Health Department officials said specifically they weren't going after our businesses because we had a lawsuit in place. So we left it in place. So I think we did the right thing. It brought in, we opened our businesses, our small mom and pop restaurants would all tell you they were saved because of that. So I think we did the right thing. And in hindsight, I think we did the right thing. And if you look at we were the only ones that kept our concerts, did our concerts. We're the only ones that did our festivals. We're the only ones that left our fields open for kids to use. And we did things differently. I mean, 8-foot squares, 8 feet apart is not a normal concert. So we followed the rules. We did things differently, but we held them all. We gave people an option. We gave them some sense of normalcy. And at the end of the day, our case rate was lower than suburban Cook County, and it was lower than the state of Illinois. So I think we did it the right way.
I wrote a column in one of the newspapers in your lovely district recently, talking about how Republicans need to focus on messages and candidates that accept reality. And it seems strange that many Republicans or conservatives or wherever along the line you want to call them, didn't believe COVID was a significant problem, a significant loss of life. And we can, and I don't even have an opinion at this point on mask mandates or those sort of things, but can you look at the data that we saw, the clear science that yeah, while we did learn more as things happened, that COVID was a real threat, it did cost real lives, it did have to have some sort of action while we learned what was happening?
So I never said COVID wasn't real. What I said was that
I'm not saying you did. I'm just saying that was up.
So what we did is we did the mitigation efforts that were required. If you look at the letters that I sent the governor, I said, open golf course, please open golf. And it wasn't just me, 8 other mayors signed it, or 7 other mayors signed it too. Open golf courses, open parks. You have Costco's open with hundreds of people in line, and Mirabali shoes can't be open. That makes no sense. And they kept saying, well, restaurants, because people go to restaurants. That was their rationale. Like, well, if restaurants were the cause, restaurant workers would have it at a higher rate. Restaurant workers did not have it at a higher rate. So this is just what people do. They go to restaurants, they stop at McDonald's, they do those types of things, right? So it was very clear within a month that this was basically hitting our vulnerable populations. And we did nothing to protect seniors, the senior centers, which is, we also asked the governor to do more in his mitigations to protect those places, which he did not do. So at the end of the day, the damage that was done, and you can look, and I've looked at it, worldwide, the mitigation efforts, the lockdowns were a failure. That's come out. The mandates have been a failure. The vaccine looks like a preventive. It helps the disease to be less deadly, particularly for the vulnerable. It certainly doesn't stop you from getting it. And so not enforcing mandates and not enforcing vaccine mandates, not enforcing mask mandates, I think was absolutely the right thing to do, to let people make their own choices. And I think the numbers here in Orland Park show that that's true. And at the same time, when the state and the county could not get PPE for our medical offices in town in April of 2020, so they couldn't open back up, we went out and sourced at KN95 masks, because they couldn't buy it by the pallet, and they came and bought that for cost and opened back up. So we got them back open in April of, actually before April of 2021, but we were trying to get vaccine doses because we had a plan for vaccinating people, and we were trying to get doses for people, and the state wouldn't give it to us, the county wouldn't give it to us. So we went to pharmacies, and pharmacies were able to provide 1,300 doses, and they said we could do it in 2 categories. So we did seniors, and then we also did teachers, any teachers that worked in Orland Park or lived in Orland Park, because we wanted kids to get back in school. And the seniors that ended up getting vaccinated here were the ones that couldn't get to other locations, because we also had a bus service that picked them up and brought them in. So we did an awful lot to help people get what they needed, but we allowed people to make their own choices, and we didn't force it. And the government actions, in I think Illinois, we see it, the government actions were disastrous for their businesses. They were disastrous for people, and they're disastrous for the young kids that are going to be saddled with the debt that we put on, because we paid people, we closed their businesses, and then we basically shoveled them money to keep them afloat. Then we're facing all of the structural problems we're facing right now with the supply chain because of those actions. So it was real, but our actions, and it's been shown. I mean, our case rate, I think, and positivity rate is higher now than it ever has been. Now we're not using that anymore. And back in May of 2020, I was saying these are horrible metrics. We should be using COVID hospital. If we're worried about protecting hospitals, we should be using hospitalized because of COVID, which is now what they're finally using, because that's what told you what was really happening.
And I wanted to start with that, just since that's what so many folks had heard most about you in recent year, or the last couple of years. But I do want to talk about some federal issues, since you're seeking a seat in Congress. And I feel like we need to start with guns, since that's the issue that is at top of mind for so many after the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas a few weeks ago. It's easy for Republicans running in a primary to run to the right and say, I'm pro Second Amendment, pry my AR-15 out of my cold dead hands. But then you see the carnage, whether it's Uvalde, whether it's Stoneman Douglas, wherever it may have been. And we've seen too many of these. What are you willing to, as a Republican, what are you willing to do in Washington to help keep the guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them?
First, federalizing things is not the way our government's set up. It's a state. These are state-related issues. And at the end of the day, here in Chicago, for example, we have the highest, some of the highest murder rates in the country. We have the toughest gun laws in the country. We don't enforce them. Murder is illegal. Shooting at people is illegal. Shooting someone is illegal. Felons possessing guns are illegal, yet we have a 1,700% increase in people on electronic monitoring under Kim Foxx, and violence is going through the roof. Well, there's not a shock there. So we need to keep violence. It's a violence problem. It's a criminal problem. And we need to focus on violence and criminals, not law-abiding gun owners. And everything that I have seen there, and people who've asked me questions, they don't even know what they're proposing, because they don't understand what they're saying. It's easy to say, oh, ban assault weapons. Well, what does that mean? No one can define what an assault weapon. No one that's asked me that question has defined what an assault weapon is, because they won't define it.
Well, okay, but what about red flag laws? Whether this
we have them in the state of Illinois. It's a state by state issue. It's not
but guns are a federal issue. I mean, if you want to use the Second Amendment as an example, and you've got the federal background check system, the NICS, so it already is a federal issue.
Red flag laws are in state. They're state laws right now. Murder is a state crime. I mean, that's what it is. So it's states and local. I mean, as someone who has police underneath them, those are the things that we enforce. It's not something the FBI enforces. It's something we enforce. So these things already exist. But whatever red flag laws are there has to be due process for anyone who's there. You can't take away their rights, without the appropriate due process. So whatever there is there, it has to have the appropriate due process.
Universal background checks,
Universal, we already have background checks here in Illinois. We have
but
FOID
not
cards.
universal, not universal. There's the gun show loophole. There's private transfers, et cetera.
Well, so I'm not going to support anything that goes after private transfers. I'm not going to start getting involved in people's things. Again, this is a fundamental Second Amendment right. It's the only right that was given for an object for something for people to possess. And so that's where I stand on it. I'm a CCL carrier and I'm a FOID card owner. So FOID card holder, and I'm a gun owner.
And on abortion, which, we expect a Supreme Court ruling potentially to overturn Roe in the next few weeks. Again, it's going to kick that back to the states, but you've got federal issues that are part of this, whether it's the Hyde Amendment, whether it's Congress taking action currently to codify Roe in federal law. What do you see and what do you want to do in Congress related to abortion?
I'm adopted 7 years before Roe v. Wade. Most loving act anyone ever gave me was a 15-year-old carrying me to term and giving me up for adoption. I'm also an adoptive parent. So I'm going to do everything I can in the federal government to see adoptions to be more affordable. My parents were not rich people. They could not afford to adopt today. And a lot of the adoption laws that are in place today make it very difficult on the adoptive parent, makes it very risky. Their babies can be taken away 3-4 years into their adoption. I think those things are all wrong. I think we need to do everything we can to see babies born and babies adopted. And there are plenty of people out there that would be happy to give them loving homes. And we haven't done a good job of that.
And I wanted to talk about the economy and inflation as well, Mayor. I think the thing that's clearly impacting folks' daily lives right now is the price of gasoline. I mean, I haven't been to Orland recently, but here in my corner of the suburbs, it's $6 for regular unleaded, and even higher once you cross into the city. What action should Congress take to provide immediate relief? Is that a temporary repeal of the federal gas tax, temporary lowering of the federal gas tax? The party line seems to be, well, unleash oil and gas energy, and that makes sense for the long term. But what about people who are putting half their paycheck into a gas tank every week?
So again, this is you hit the nail on the head. $6 a gallon. Well, it got here in a very short order, and it got there because we constrained oil and gas. I mean, as far as short term, something that we can do is we do need to unleash all of our energy sectors, and so we need to be looking at all that, because these prices, they look at the long term. So it's the policies you put in place that drive a lot of this pricing and a lot of what's happening. So we need to be energy independent. We need to focus on our oil and gas sector, and we need to be providing it here instead of shipping money over to the Middle East and over to Russia and letting them control what's happening. Those are the things specifically that we need to do to help, because it's gas prices that will bring down the price of everything else. And giving temporary relief to people. We're $30 trillion in debt. We did the same thing in COVID. We shoveled out money to people. We just keep shoveling. Well, guess what? Someone is paying for that. We pay for that. When you're in debt like that, you can't just shovel money to people. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we unleash our industries so that they can generate. When you've constricted supply, price is going to go up. It's simple economics 101. So we need to make sure that supply is not constricted. We need to be doing everything that we can to make sure that that happens, because fuel is the most immediate. The immediate thing that will help drive costs down is fuel. It's not just a fuel issue, but it's the most pressing thing that we can do, because everything gets shipped. Everything gets moved by truck or train, and everything needs fuel. On top of that, a third of all of our oil goes towards making products. It doesn't even go towards energy. So those products are going up as well. But the inflationary policies that we put in over the last couple of years, which include obviously spending way more money than what we have and printing money. So that's inflationary. We paid people for stay home from work, which constricted the labor supply, which is inflationary. We shut down businesses which shut down supply and impacted supply chains. Again, inflationary. We paid, certain businesses couldn't be open while others were open. Again, inflationary. All these policies are inflationary. So it's not a surprise that we're here. It doesn't happen immediately overnight.
Have you watched any of the January 6th commission
I have not.
hearings or paid any attention to it? You know, I'm not in the mood for gotcha questions, because that's not the game that I play, but and I'm not going to try and parse what was the meaning of an insurrection and those sort of things. But when you and obviously for anyone who sees behind you, you served, and thank you for your service. You worked to defend this country, you know, and did it hurt you specifically when you saw people attack the Capitol, you know, chant to hang the vice president, to stop the counting of a presidential election? What were your feelings specifically as someone who works in public life and also served?
So at the end of the day, I take great pride in my constitutional oath, you know, whether it be the Second Amendment, whether it be the right to protest, and people have the right to protest peacefully. And when a peaceful protest turns into a riot, turns violent, or starts to damage things, and that's whether it's in the Capitol or whether it's in the city of Chicago, those people need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and they need to be prosecuted swiftly. So my opinion here is that it started off as a protest, and anytime you get that many people in a close proximity like that, it can spiral out of control very quickly, and it did. And it's very unfortunate. But we've had other incidents. We've had a bombing at the Capitol. We've had other things throughout our history, and we've gotten through it. And so from that perspective, you know, I think we need to keep that picture that we've been through a lot worse, including a civil war. We do have to keep that in perspective. But anyone who, you know, again, turned violent or, you know, broke into the Capitol, et cetera, they should be prosecuted. And that's what should happen.
Before we let you go, why are you the guy? You know, the 6th was drawn Democratic leaning, you know, even in a what could be a Republican year nationwide. Why are you the guy to be a Republican that flips a Democratic seat in the state?
I've been, so 5 years ago when I ran for mayor, I was running against a machine-backed incumbent who'd been in for 24 years and served for 30 years total. Or 28 years total. And I was down 64-10 in the first poll, and I came back and I won. And I'd never run for office before. My last election a year ago, the unions put in $300,000. There was $500,000 spent to try and oust me from the mayor's position. Not only did I win, but so did all 3 trustees. So I have a proven track record, 1, of taking on the Democratic machine and winning. 2, I have a proven track record of doing exactly what I said I would do. I've lowered spending. I've lowered our property tax rates are down 20%. I've lowered our operating spending 14%. I promised I'd put in term limits. I did. I promised I would get rid of elected official pensions. I did. I promised I would lower the mayor's pay. I did. So I have a proven track record of doing the things that I said I would do. So for that reason, and my experience as an F-15E instructor Wizzo, as a business owner, small business owner, and as a mayor, I think makes me uniquely qualified to serve the people in Congress and in Washington, D.C.
Orland Park Mayor Keith Peacock, candidate in the 6th district. Mayor, how do people find you online?
www.keithpeacock, KEITHPEKAU.com.
Mayor, thanks so much for the time. Good luck over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.